Good evening, everybody. Hi. So it's been a little while. Tonight's obviously quite special. I'm a little nervous. I was thinking about it. I believe he needs no introduction here. However, I was thinking about it and I thought, I think probably I can count on one hand the number of people in this country who could be called Shakespeare scholar, Shakespeare educator, Shakespeare adaptor, and Shakespeare artist. And we at the Old Globe in San Diego are so fortunate to have among us the great Barry Edelstein.
Well, thank you, Cam. That's super nice of you, and I'm happy to be sharing the platform with you. And hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. Excited that you're interested in the project. So, thanks for being here.
Well, Barry, I am obviously someone who works with you, but I am also a fan of your work, and I am really lucky to be able to spend my working days with you. But I take this as an opportunity to maybe ask you some questions that I'm not able to ask you when we're talking about things
please.
like budgets and
okay.
season planning and how are we going to replace that artist and things like that. So here we go.
Yep.
So we are embarking, or have embarked, really, on this tremendous project of this two-part Henry VI.
Yep.
We opened this weekend. So exciting. We've been in previews since last week, 2 weekends ago, I believe.
Two weekends, yeah.
And at first I thought, well, I could just ask him, why do this? It's such a behemoth of a project. But really, I know that the answer to that has many parts. So I just want to start with, what was the first inkling that you had those years ago that made you think, yeah, I think I want to tackle this?
Well, that's a great question. The play. So ever since I was starting out in Shakespeare, I've had this dream of directing all the plays. Because sort of, why not? Why not do that? And I've been doing it I've been directing Shakespeare for a little over 30 years, and these are numbers 18 and 19. So as a director, I'm just past halfway through. I've produced a whole bunch of the rest of the plays. I've dramaturged other directors' productions of a whole bunch of the plays, and I've taught a bunch of the plays. So now I've actually touched on all of them in some capacity. Someone else will decide whether I get to do the remaining 19 of them. That's maybe out of my control. So there are a bunch of the Shakespeare plays that are considered minor works that are just rarely produced. And those are plays like Timon of Athens, Titus Andronicus, King John, the kind of, the hidden corners of the canon that get overshadowed by Romeo and Juliet and As You Like It in King Lear and Julius Caesar and Othello, what we in the Shakespeare business call the Golden Ten, right? Hamlet and the really, really famous Shakespeare plays. And they tend to crowd out the minor works. So I've always had an interest in them because you go, wow, I want to see what they are. I want to know about them. And I first came across these plays when I was in graduate school. And in fact, Henry VI Part 1 was the first play that my tutor at Oxford asked me to write about. So it's had a special place in my heart. I fell in love with the plays then. I had a wonderful experience working on them. And I like them very much, and I think that they are kind of unjustly relegated to minor status. They are among Shakespeare's very first plays. Henry VI Part 1 probably is his first play. We don't know. The first 6 plays of Shakespeare that he wrote in the first 3 or 4 years of his life, he wasn't famous enough yet to leave the kind of paper trail that he later left. So there's not a lot of clarity about the very early phase of his writing career, and therefore we're not sure which plays he wrote first, but these are certainly among his very first. Another reason why they're kind of neglected, because he's just not the writer yet that he will be when he writes The Merchant of Venice and Much Ado About Nothing, and then the masterpieces of the late phase of his career. So there's a lot of reasons to not pay attention to them. Plus, they're giant. The 3 plays have, 170 named characters in them if you put them together. And the story only makes sense if, in fact, you do all 3. You can't just go to the theater one night and see Henry VI Part 2, because without Henry VI Part 1 and Henry VI Part 3, it just doesn't make any sense. So they kind of don't get done. And I knew that they had wonderful stuff in them. I knew that they were worth exploring. I knew that I personally liked them and wanted to do them. And then, of course, I knew that the Globe had never done them, right? So next year, the Globe turns 90, and these are the only 3 of Shakespeare's plays that the Globe has never done. So from the time I got here 12 years ago and I looked at the list, which was the same, they still weren't done then, right? Even at that point, the Globe had done at least once all the others. Even 12 years ago, the Globe had done all the others. They just had never done those. So there was that reason too. So a lot of reasons to do it. I will say I feel very vindicated because the response in the crowd has been really wonderful. I don't know if anybody's seen the first play yet. Great. I'm glad that you have. They're just tremendously entertaining and really a lot of fun. And one of the things I hope we're doing here is making a case for the stage worthiness of these plays.
Okay, so you've had this percolating in the back of your mind, it sounds like, for years now. But take me to the moment where you thought that this was a viable project that the Old Globe could undertake.
Yeah, well, that has to do with an incredibly random encounter with a philanthropist. This is the story of the nonprofit theater in America. All of you love the Old Globe. You support the Old Globe. I'm so grateful to all of you for doing that. And one of the things you know is that we pay for this theater basically in 3 ways. 2, really. One is by selling tickets, which earns us income. And the second is by raising money. The third pot is that we have an endowment that earns money in the stock market. And then we live off, we spend the interest that's earned by that endowment. But that's contributed income too. Somebody left us that money that's then been invested. So really there's 2 sources of income, earned and contributed. And the Globe basically earns something like 60% of our annual budget every year and has to raise the rest. Some theaters do 50-50. There are some theaters that earn only 30% and raise 70%. There's some theaters that earn 80% and raise only 20%. We're 60-40. So we can't do our work without philanthropists. And when you look at a big giant project like Henry VI, it doesn't pencil out because the expense of doing shows this big versus the likely ticket sales, given the fact that they're minor titles, just make you say, well, we can't do it. There's just no way to do it. Enter a philanthropist from Tennessee named Roy Cockrum. Roy will be here later this week. He's coming to the opening. And Roy has an incredibly interesting story that is a long version that will take me the rest of our time to tell, and a short version. And the short version is that he was an actor in New York City in the 70s, in the sort of downtown gay New York theater scene of the 1970s. He won the Publishers Clearinghouse for something like $40,000 or $50,000, right? And then he decided, I want to do this thing that I've always wanted to do. And he dropped out of the theater scene and he moved to his hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee, and became a monk, a Benedictine monk, and entered an order in Knoxville, Tennessee, a monastery in Knoxville, Tennessee, where his vice of gambling on sweepstakes continued. And he played the Powerball while he was a monk in Tennessee. And in 2014, he hit the Powerball for $270 million. So he decided that he would go to England and see theater, and he loved what he saw at the great nationally subsidized theaters, the Royal Shakespeare Company, the National Theatre, these giant shows with 30 people in the cast and, Nicholas Nickleby with 2 parts. He loved that, and he could never find that in the United States. So he said, I'm going to make that happen. And with his fortune, he founded a foundation whose job is to give grants to theater companies to do audacious and otherwise impossible productions. So his MO is he flies around the United States with his entourage and secretly goes to see plays. And so in 2015, he came here and saw a play. He saw our production of Twelfth Night outside. We didn't know it. We had no idea that he was here. He had only just started giving out these grants because he hit the jackpot the year before. And in 2017, I got a phone call. Roy Cockrum here. And I said, hey, how are you? Okay. And he said, listen, I love your theater. I think you're doing interesting work. I want to know if you have a project that you'd like to talk to me about. And I said, I do, in fact, and the Globe should complete the Shakespeare canon. I'm going to do a 2-part adaptation of Henry VI. I'm going to include our community-based work. And what do you think? He said, yeah, great idea, I'm in. And he gave us a really, really significant grant. He's asked us not to disclose the number, but it is a really significant grant. And that is how we're doing this. So it was in 2017 when we started thinking about it. So yeah, it's a great story. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing story, and it's a story that deserves to be told. It's a story that I think kind of points the way forward for arts philanthropy in this country because, what he's done with this grant has changed the lives of everybody who's a part of this. All of us who are working on it are having an extraordinary experience. Audiences are getting this opportunity to see this rare thing done at a level. I mean, the production's budget is the same as one of our Broadway-bound musicals. It's the biggest Shakespeare the Globe has ever produced, and it's a multi-million-dollar production produced at the same level as one of the big Broadway shows that you're used to seeing in our indoor theater. There's video technology, there's automated scenery, there's a cast of 30. Plus, there is this giant community-based component, and almost, by the time we open this weekend, 1,000 people will have participated in various workshops and other parts of this work. So Roy's largesse has touched the lives of thousands of people in San Diego in a deeply transformative way because community members who had no idea that Shakespeare or theater was interesting came down here and, did a singing workshop with the composer or did an acting workshop with me, or if we filmed them. There's some video footage of regular San Diego citizens that are in the show. And these people have had deeply, deeply powerful experiences, again, all because of Roy. So what it says is that a philanthropist can do creative, outside-the-box gestures that really change the game, And there's a reporter from the New York Times coming down on Friday to write about this show, and the story is going to be about Roy Cockrum. And I'm glad that he's going to get the national attention that the New York Times will bring, and I hope that others with those kind of means will say, wow, maybe I could do something crazy like that and really, really change the game for these nonprofits. So that's what happened. So once that happened, then it was, okay, how are we going to do it? And that started looking like a very large version of a normal production process at the Globe.
I have to admit, I'm really looking forward to meeting Roy Cockrum and just maybe even shaking his hand and hoping some of that lucky juju will rub off on me, and then I'll buy a Powerball the next day.
The Publishers Clearinghouse and the Powerball.
I mean, wow.
It's insane, right? Amazing.
But it sounds like by the time he called you, you already had a pretty strong idea of what this project was going to look like. It sounds like you had started to imagine the community engagement. Yeah. You knew it was going to be in 2 parts. Mm-hmm. How far along were you at that point?
That's about as far along as I was. The community engagement piece has been a dream of the Globe ever since we started our arts engagement work 8-9 years ago now, which is we've been trying to figure out ways to bring our community-based work and our professional art-making work together, to kind of take the 2 sides of the Globe's brain and merge them together. And Shakespeare has always been on the cutting edge of that because Shakespeare is the primary focus of our community-based work. And Shakespeare is the focus of our community-based work because of the cultural currency that Shakespeare has. Everybody reads Shakespeare in high school. Everybody knows about Shakespeare. You can go to any group of people, whether it's in a prison, a veterans organization, a homeless shelter, a refugee center, with kids, with seniors, with people of middle age, and you can say, we're working on Shakespeare, and they go, oh, I know that. And Shakespeare becomes this passport to civic participation. And those of you who know my work, I did a podcast about this called Where There's a Will, which is all about the omnipresence of Shakespeare in American culture outside of the theater. There's just something about this writer who is a passport to participation, a door through which people can step. So from the time we started our arts engagement work, we were saying we want to bring arts engagement to the core of the institution, and that means that arts engagement has to have a piece of the professional art making that we're doing, and Shakespeare's the natural place to do it. But that's really all I knew. I knew I'd like to do the plays. A two-part adaptation seemed to me to be more logical and more achievable than trying to do all three. All three of the plays don't hold up. They're not. The truth is, as much as I'm a Shakespeare partisan and a Shakespeare defender, to do all 5 acts of Henry VI Part 1, it doesn't work anymore. It's just not King Lear. It's not Hamlet. It doesn't sustain. So you have to condense it. You have to trim it. You have to prune out the stuff that is repetitive, the stuff that doesn't quite reach that level that we associate with later Shakespeare. So I knew 2 parts, and I knew arts engagement, and that's all I knew. And once Roy said yes, then the real work started.
Yeah, let's talk about that real work. I understand that about 85% of the 2 plays combined were Shakespeare's words, and about 15% are you.
Yeah, ish. 10, 15% are me. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know who's done the math, but
yeah.
So talk about that. So what did you contribute to this giant adaptation?
Well, I spent a lot of time. I started working on the adaptation in 2019 because we thought we were going to do it in 2020, and then the pandemic came. And Roy generously said, nope, take the year, get back to me. Then we were going to do it the year after the pandemic, and my 2 key lieutenants, your predecessor, Justin Waldman, and Freedom Bradley Ballantyne, who founded our arts engagement department, both left for New York, and we just weren't ready. We didn't have the people in place yet to do it. So Roy said, take another year, right? He very generously just said, keep on extending it till you're ready to go, which is great. So that gave me a lot of time to figure out how to do it. And the first thing I did was I made a huge outline of all 3 of Shakespeare's plays. And I used this software the screenwriters use, which puts each little piece of action kind of on an index card. So you know what's going to, here's the scene where so-and-so kills so-and-so. Here's the scene where so-and-so challenges so-and-so. Here's the scene where so-and-so kisses so-and-so. And you can take all that action and just shuffle it around. Right? To take this index card and move it over to here, and move it over there, move it over there. And eventually I figured out a way to tell all 3 plays in one clear arc. And then having made that outline, I then took those pages of the Shakespeare and just cut and paste them into a sort of straight line that hewed to the design of the dramatic arc that I had made with this outline. And then when I read it together, I went, oh, there's holes. There's just stuff missing, and I've got to fill in those holes. And one way to fill in those holes is to make up a piece of staging that shows time pass, or that shows people travel from point A to point B without words. Another way to do it is to just write words. And I've been around Shakespeare long enough that I'm pretty adept at writing what I call Fakespeare. Or some people call it Makespeare. And 2-3 lines that are in iambic pentameter, that use the vocabulary and the grammar and syntax of Elizabethan speech, that will sound to most non-experts like Shakespeare. And it does. And, you'll be the judge. There are a couple of speeches in the play that are big, long speeches that I wrote because I thought, well, King Henry doesn't get a death speech in Shakespeare. And our story starts with the birth of King Henry and ends with the death of King Henry. Shakespeare's 3rd play, Henry VI, Part 3, is very concerned with getting ready for the play Richard III. So the second half of Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 3 is laying all this pipe for Richard III, which we're not doing. So I got rid of all of that. And then I had to figure out what to do instead and how to make the battle make sense and how to make the political alliances make sense. So I did a lot of writing. The second half of our second play has more of me in it than the rest of it does. And in particular, Henry just doesn't get a death speech, and it's conspicuous. He's the lead. He's the king. He's the main character, and he doesn't get a death speech. So I wrote him a death speech. That's the piece where it's really not Shakespeare. And interesting to watch people watch it, because I don't think most people know. People may be following along and go, what? Wait, flip. I don't see that. And in that sense, here's where this is how Shakespeare's been done for hundreds of years, right? I mean, up until the beginning of the 20th century, when the English Stage Company in Stratford, which was the precursor of the Royal Shakespeare Company. The Royal Shakespeare Company started in the 60s, and in the 30s there was this company called the English Shakespeare Company, which invented the kind of philosophy of accurate, sort of loyal productions of Shakespeare. That up until that point, people did what I'm doing, rewrote them. Wrote speeches, tossed stuff out, condensed them, refashioned them. The idea that we actually should do the words that are on the page in the first folio really is invented at the beginning of the 20th century. Nobody who produced Shakespeare before that would have thought that. The other thing is my hero in Shakespeare is Orson Welles, and Orson Welles is the greatest ever American Shakespearean. I have devoted my entire life to the idea that there is such a thing as authentic American Shakespeare. That's all I care about. I don't much care for English Shakespeare. I like it, I admire it, but I'm not that interested in it. I'm interested in American Shakespeare for American audiences, and that's Orson Welles. And the genius of Orson Welles was his ability to condense and refashion these plays. And his cuts of Shakespeare are published, and you can get them. And if you ever have a chance to look at Orson Welles' Julius Caesar, it's a masterpiece. Or if you ever get a chance to look at Orson Welles' movie Chimes at Midnight, which tells Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, and Henry V, which is widely considered to be the greatest Shakespeare movie of all time, some footage of which appears by video in our production, just because I wanted the blessing of Orson. He does what we're doing here, takes these giant pieces and just like and moves stuff around and condenses stuff and writes a line here and a line there and a speech there. And I don't, please forgive me uttering my name and Orson Welles' name in the same sentence. That's not at all what I mean. But that idea that there is a vital, authentic American way to do Shakespeare comes from him, and that's kind of been my inspiration doing this. So it took me months to write a draft. We did a workshop, you remember, in March of 2020, which was canceled when the entire MFA company came down with COVID. So the first time we sat down to hear what my script sounded like, it got canceled by COVID. We did it again once the pandemic receded, and then we got going. And then in rehearsal, I've done a lot of cutting and changing and rearranging as one does. But it's I'm pretty proud of it. I think it really works and really makes a good case for the plays.
Yeah, I agree. So you had the blessing of, or you had this idea, you're about to embark on it. Talk about the team that you then wanted to assemble to help you create this piece.
So there were two pieces to it. First was this idea of bringing the arts engagement community piece together. So the plays are very interested in the impact of political decisions on regular people. And throughout the plays, Shakespeare spends most of the time with kings and lords and dukes and duchesses, but then will leave them for a minute and just checks in on regular folks. And in Henry VI Part 2, there is a sustained period which is a popular uprising against the government. There's a long section of a series of scenes that's a popular uprising against the government. There's another episode in the plays where a character is murdered and the citizenry gets wind that the king might be behind this murder, and so they storm the palace. So throughout the plays, the regular people of England show up. And I thought that's how to get the arts engagement department together, is that the regular people of San Diego should be the regular people of England in the plays. And at first we thought, well, we'll get 60 people to show up every night at 8 o'clock. And we put a lot of energy going down that road, and it was the pandemic that killed that. Once the pandemic happened, we realized we're never going to get 60 people to come here. We figured out how to pay them. Here's how we would pay them. We'd use some of Roy's money to actually pay regular volunteer people to come down and be here. And we realized we were never going to get that to happen. And somebody on the staff said, I can't remember who it was.
It was Katie.
Might have been Katie Haroff said, well, let's just film them and then we'll project them via video, and that's how we'll get them in. So we went down that road. So there was one part of the process that was all about how are we going to get the arts engagement department here. Adina Varner, the director of arts engagement, came up with this idea that the designers would come to San Diego and do workshops with people, and the material that those designers worked on with our community groups informed the design that you're going to see when you're out there. And then each night we have a handful of people show up live and do little walk-on cameo parts. So there's a lot of community participation before and during, both virtually and in person. But then it was the work of normally doing a show. Who's going to be the set designer? Who's going to be the costume designer? Who's going to be the lighting designer? Who's going to be the sound designer? Who's going to be the composer? There's live music. There's a live band in the show. And so who's going to write that music? Who's going to be the band? And then and Elaine Aldaffer in New York casting the show with me. So that was the normal part of it, right? The design and how we're going to do it. That was what we do every summer. It was the scale of it, the fact that there were 2 plays, the fact that there was this community piece, the fact that Roy's resources allowed us to do extraordinary things like have video in the show, which is exceedingly expensive and which we've never done in Shakespeare before because we could never afford it. That was the unusual stuff.
And so when you had your design team in place, did you already at that point have a look for the production, for the set and for the costumes?
Yeah. So the wonderful thing about being a director, at least the way that I like to direct, is you get incredibly talented people around and you plant a little seed. So I said to the composer, Julian Mesri, who's a New York-based composer, brilliant guy, I said, I don't know, I hear guitar. I think it should be acoustic guitar in the first play and electric guitar in the second play. And that's all he needed. And off he went. I'm not a musician. I'm not a composer. I don't know anything. I just said, I think that's the world that it should be. Similarly with Lawrence Moten, who's the set designer. So one of the things I know about the history of American Shakespeare is what happened in Central Park in New York in the 1960s. So before I came here to San Diego, I was in charge of Shakespeare at the Delacorte Theater in New York, the famous Shakespeare in the Park in New York. The Delacorte Theater is one of the great Shakespeare stages in the country, along with the Lowell Davies Festival stage. And in the 60s, they did a series of productions of Shakespeare's English history plays at the Delacorte, which were designed by maybe the dean of American stage design, a man named Ming-Cho Lee. Ming-Cho Lee, Chinese-American, who ended up being the greatest set designer really of the mid to late 20th century, and in the last chapter of his life was the head of design at the Yale School of Drama. And he designed a series of productions of Shakespeare plays, in particular Shakespeare's histories, at the Delacorte using scaffold sets. He would do this enormous scaffold construction that had levels and a floor, and the material of the scaffolding was maybe stone in one show and wood in another and steel in another, and somehow had some sense or essence of the period of Shakespeare's plays. And if you ever get to Google him, Ming-Cho Lee, you'll see these famous sets. So I went to Lawrence Moten and I said, I don't know anything, but what I do know is I wonder what Ming-Cho Lee would do in 2024. And I wonder if we could do our response to what Ming was doing at the Delacorte in 1962. And that's what Lawrence did. And when you go out there, you'll see lurking way in the background is just a little flavor of those Delacorte Shakespeares from the 1960s that we then took in a completely different place. They didn't have automated scenery then, we do. They didn't have the kind of materials that we use now. we are using modern materials to do this stuff. But that was the idea. So like in every instance, the fun thing is you go to these artists and you say, here's a little dit and here's a little that, and then they go away and they come back with this fully baked thing. And that's the joy of it, because they're smarter than I am. And all those heads put together make something that one head could not make. That's the brilliance of the theater. It's a truly collaborative art form, and it is additive. So then Lawrence shows his work to the costume designer, David Israel Reynoso. David and I said, okay, it's going to be period up until this point, and then modern stuff is going to start to come in after this point. And David went to town with that, you know? So it does start with me saying, yeah, here's my hunch. And my hunch is this. And then all these amazing artists go off and bring that into 3 dimensions. And it's wonderful. It's been, what's out there on that stage is so far beyond anything that I could have imagined, because it has in it the abundant and brilliant and thrilling imaginations of all these other artists who are working at the highest level. And it's really fun, and we love each other. We've had a great time. And it's one of those rare productions where everybody's rowing in the same direction, because that's often where trouble starts, where the set designer and the costume designer are going in this direction, but the lighting designer is going over there. And it's the director's job to go, lighting designer, come over here with us because we're going over here. And sometimes it just doesn't happen. And in this case, everybody is moving in exactly the same direction, speaking the same language. And it all really works as a kind of, you know, what Wagner called a Gesamtkunstwerk, right? A total work of art that uses everything to tell the story: music, movement, dance, design, visual stuff, text. You know, it's sort of operatic in that sense. It's got everything going on.
Indeed. And I also just want to point out that, you know, the cast of 30, that is something to behold. We don't get to see that on American stages these days, and not necessarily on Broadway or, you know, on tour. That's just a size that is harder to achieve budgetarily.
And never in the regional theater.
Correct.
Never in the regional theater.
And so you had the help also of 2 fabulous artists to design your fights, because we have these big battle scenes, and also to do movement.
Yeah. So Jacob Gregorio Rosenbaum did the fights. We've done 5 Shakespeares here together. I wouldn't do it with anybody else but him. We speak the same language, we have the same sense of humor, and we understand each other, and we enjoy each other, and we have a shorthand now about how to handle violence, and the plays are very, very violent. They're big battle scenes, there are slaps, there are murders, there are hand-to-hand combat. So somebody needs to help me figure out how to get the actors to be able to do that, and that's Jacob. And then, since I knew I had 30 people and 40 scenes, there are 20 scenes in each play, which means that there are 40 scene changes. And so I knew that I wanted a choreographer who could handle moving all those people around. I'm pretty good at it, but there are things that I'm not that good at. And so this extraordinary choreographer named Chelsea Arce has come in, and you know, there's a scene, for instance, where a woman is arrested for committing an act of witchcraft, and then she's marched through the public square where people scream at her and humiliate her. And that entire sequence was figured out by Chelsea. All these people sort of moving, throwing things at her in slow motion, and doing all this stuff. So that's been an important part of the work as well.
Yeah, and I also want to shout out our MFA program, because 14 of our students are part of this huge cast, and you know, they fill out the roles of soldiers and messengers, and we also have 4 young actors who are.
The cast is interesting. So there are 12 professional actors and members of Actors Equity Association. 2 of them are based here in San Diego. Three of them. 4? Who's the?
Mike Sears,
Sonia,
right. Sophia.
4, right. So a third of the professional company is based here in San Diego. The other 8 have come in mostly from New York. Then all 14 of our MFA acting students who are in training at the University of San Diego are in it. And then there are 4 young San Diego actors that we call the Corps, C-O-R-P-S. The play is full of messengers who run in and say, the Irish are invading from the West. And that's it. That's all they come in and say. Here's a letter from the Queen. And then they go away. And so we have these 4 wonderful young actors who do all of that. Every single time there's a messenger that comes in, it's one of these 4 who comes in, and they're local San Diego people as well. So yeah, plus the walk-ons. So in part 1, if we have 5 walk-ons, that's 35 people on the stage in the course of the night, which is amazing.
It really is. I know that we probably have some questions from this crowd, so I do want to give a little bit of time for that. But I just wanted to ask you, Barry, this is such a milestone for the Old Globe. Yeah. What's the next big dream?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm going to do a 1-person show that's 1 hour long, in which nobody moves. Yeah, well, I can say this, Adina and I, we've been deeply moved by the way in which the community-based piece of this has resonated with people. And so we're talking about where it goes from here. Now, without the extraordinary resources of Roy Cockrum, that's going to be harder to do. But I think there's a lot that we can figure out, and it's about making sure that the directors who come and work here think about that. If nothing else, getting the designers to come out to San Diego 8 months in advance and just do workshops with our community groups is a practice I'm sure we're going to continue. So I don't know. We have to, once this thing is done, I think the whole institution is going to sit down and do a big kind of post-mortem meeting and say, all right, what do we learn, and what do we want to do? There's something extremely powerful about sharing the professional art making of the Old Globe with the community at large, and there's really nobody else in the country doing it. It's extremely unique. There's a couple theaters in England doing versions of it. The Public Theater in New York has a different approach to it, where they do a big show in the Delacorte every summer and have 250 people come in. But they'll be for example, they'll do 12th night and there will be a dance number. So they get the local, you name it, African dance company or Bangladeshi dance outfit or whatever it is. They go to some neighborhood in New York and they say, would you like your dance company to come and be on our show? And then that's what happens. Or, a high school marching band comes out. Very different approach to how we're doing it here. So there are a couple of theaters experimenting with this, but there's nobody really anywhere doing quite what we're doing here, and I think the Globe is going to be thinking hard about how to continue it forward. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel like our institution has evolved in this process, and we've just grown in ways that I don't think any other process would have allowed us to do.
I totally agree, and it's a big win for the institution. You see that big, when you came in here today, you saw the big display on our plaza, right? So, I had this extremely moving moment. Danielle Amato in the back is responsible for that. Danielle, fantastic. And there was this amazing day. Yeah, let's give Danielle a hand. And a couple of our facilities guys were up on a ladder figuring out, well, should we string the flags horizontally or should we string the flags diagonally? And they were really passionate about which one it should be. And I thought, well, that's fantastic. It has engaged the entire institution in the making of this giant show in a way that our normal production output somehow doesn't do, And maybe it's the specialness of completing the canon. Maybe it's that special Shakespeare thing that I talked about. Shakespeare has a way of galvanizing people that nothing else does. But it's been a massive win for the institution. And we have to think about how to celebrate that and what we want to do with that going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Looks like we already have a question. Danielle's going to come up with the microphone. If you would just take that and ask your question into the mic, please.
Okay. I have an appreciation and then a comment. First of all, I love these plays, so thank you very much for doing them, and I think everyone is going to love them. I agree with you about that. So they deserve to be done. And then, I thought that people might be interested. I'm here from Minneapolis, where I was able to see the Henriette this spring, very similar and also sponsored by Roy Cockrum.
Yeah.
So That's really an amazing thing.
That's an amazing thing. So the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis just did Richard II, Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, and Henry V, which Shakespeare wrote after these, but which tell the story that comes before. And they did Henry IV Parts 1 and 2 as one play. So they did 3 plays with a big company of, 25, 26, something like that, indoors in their big theater, directed by Joe Hodge, their artistic director, also with support from Roy Cockrum, and also planned for earlier, but delayed by the pandemic. So weirdly, Roy Cockrum has sponsored 7 Shakespeare history plays at 2 of the country's greatest theater companies, the Guthrie in Minneapolis and the Old Globe in San Diego. Joe's coming out. I went, I saw it. I flew out there to see it. It was great. Joe's coming here to see this. So and our staffs have worked together very, very closely. So welcome to San Diego.
Yeah, welcome.
Good.
Thank you. Question over here.
The logo, I was impressed with the detail. I was shocked, did the logo go through different iterations? Because when I looked at the logo when I first came, it took me a while, but I realized the title was the crown.
It was a crown, yeah.
It may be simple, it may be obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me. Once I saw it, I thought it was sheer genius.
Yeah, I agree. I think the logo is really, really cool. I'm sorry, I can't tell you the name of the artist who did it. We work with a series of artists who do the art for our productions, and this one's a real triumph. Yeah, it went through a couple of iterations, but the graphic designer figured that out pretty quickly, and it's great. I love that logo. I love it.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. She's coming with the microphone. We want to make sure everyone can hear.
I got to see part 1 last week. It was thoroughly entertaining. That's the
great
word to use for it, was entertaining. And it stayed true to the Shakespeare, but also had some innovations, I'll call them. Mm-hmm. And like the torch singer and the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. Spoiler alert. Yeah.
I got to say, what was the inspiration for the PowerPoint?
Oh yeah. Well, so there's a long speech in the play where one of the rival claimants to the crown lays out the legal case that makes him think that he has the right to be the king, and it's just a big bore. Goes on for 45 lines, and you can't follow it. You just can't follow it. So I thought, I've got to find some way to make this actually interesting, and I thought, he's a guy who is obsessed. And I just had this image of him staying up till 5 a.m, making this chart that described what his claim was. And then I went, oh, well, we have this video rig in the show, so let's make it a PowerPoint presentation. You know the PowerPoint Gettysburg Address? Are you familiar with this? Google it. It's a classic. Just Google Gettysburg Address PowerPoint, and it's a deck of PowerPoint slides that tell the Gettysburg Address. And it's a joke about the culture of PowerPoint presentations in offices, because there's a bar chart that has one bar that's 80 and another bar that's 7, And so you imagine a guy in an office putting up a chart that says 70 years ago, right? So I just love that, and so I just thought, I'll just do that, and that PowerPoint, I did the PowerPoint slides because I wanted it to be terrible and dumb, and so I just stayed up late one night and I made this deck of PowerPoint slides, and it's a lot of fun, and people, and I've seen other productions, I've seen that scene, it's deadly, and here it's actually a lot of fun, so. Yeah,
it is. It's great.
There's things in the play. In the third of Shakespeare's plays, there's this crazy scene that Shakespeare lifted from the history books that he read, where 2 of the sons of the Duke of York are on a battlefield in the morning, and the sun rises, and then a second sun rises, and then a third sun rises, and they're standing there looking in the sky, and they see 3 suns in the sky. And Shakespeare's stage direction just basically says, now rise 3 suns. And you go, what are you? How are you gonna do? What? How do you do that? What do you mean now? Three suns rise. What are you gonna do? So we came up with an elaborate staging device to show three suns rising, and that's what directing is. The play says, okay, this guy is now going to tell his two friends the legal framework for why he thinks he should be king of England. How are we going to do that? How are we going to make it fun? How are we going to make it interesting? How are we going to keep an audience engaged? Three suns have to come up. How are we going to do that? How are we going to make three suns come up? And you have a series of conversations with your collaborators, and somebody goes, well, we'll use puppets. Okay. I don't know, we'll use the video rig. Okay, great. And eventually you come up with a solution that works. So it's all starting with the question, okay, the script says this has to happen. How on earth are we going to show that? And your imagination and your collaborators together come up with a plan.
I think we have time for one more question. We have someone here. Yeah.
What was the rationale for casting young female actresses to play the parts of very powerful older men?
That's a good question. We women in American Shakespeare have gotten a raw deal for generations. If you're not playing Rosalind, or you're not playing in this play Margaret or Joan, you don't have anything to do. And for many years now, the Old Globe has said, we don't like that, and we think that there are great women, female identifying Shakespeare actors who are stupendous and tremendous and shouldn't be relegated to the teeny little part or the three female parts out of a cast of 30 in a given Shakespeare play. So we've just changed the genders of the roles so that these women would get opportunities to play the big parts like the men. In this production, we have some women playing men, and they're just women playing men. In one case, we changed the gender of the character and rewrote the character as a she and not a he. But most of the cases, it's just, okay, my name is, John Jones, and I'm just a woman, and I'm, wearing a military uniform, and I'm playing John Jones. So the short answer is we did that to make it possible for some of the tremendously talented women in the world of American Shakespeare to get more to do than they would otherwise have a chance to do. Yeah.
And on that note, I would just like to say, Barry, on behalf of the staff and everyone here, thank you
Thanks,
for bringing
Kim.
this
It's
wonderful
fun.
project to us.
Well,
And it
thank you for
really-
your work on it, Kim, and
it's
thank
been
you everybody
great.
for being
Yes.
here.
Thank you.
And
Yes.
we'll see you again.